Good afternoon. This is Robert from the Open Eye, and I'm going to read a little bit about three books for you today. One is The Little Book of Christian Mysticism. The next is Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist. And the last is the Zen Book of Life. So, The Little Book of Christian Mysticism, Introduction. In the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Christian era, spiritual seekers retreated into the deserts of Egypt, Palestine, and Syria to become hermits or monks, giving their lives to God in simplicity, austerity, and deep contemplative silence. They became known as the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and their wisdom and insight soon were committed to writing, to be passed down from generation to generation. Often in the desert, a younger person would turn to one of the elders for spiritual direction, engagement, or instruction. The younger one would ask the elder for a word, usually a short, pithy sentence or two of instruction, which the younger one would retain for meditation and reflection. Sometimes a hermit or monk might devote weeks, if not months or years, to a single one of these words or sayings in order to fully comprehend the richness of its wisdom. From that time on, the inner tradition of Christianity, like other wisdom paths, has been passed down from teacher to student, generation after generation, from the Desert Fathers and Mothers to the monks and nuns of the great medieval cloisters, down to our time when increasing numbers of Christian contemplatives lives not in the monasteries, but in the thick of our noisy, fast-paced society. Acolytes of the mystical life have relied on the wisdom of our elders to inspire us, to challenge us, and to show us the way. The wisdom of the Christian mystics is guidance for living in the love of God. God does not merely love us lavishly and joyfully like a mother loves her child. Yes, of course, God does that. Although thanks to centuries of religious misguidance, many people are blind even to this basic spiritual truth. But the mystics remind us, and it gets even better than being loved unconditionally. The heart of the mystery is not just being loved, but being love. God is not elsewhere, as a friend of mine once proclaimed in his blog, or as Master Eckhart put it, the eye with which I see God is exactly the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowledge, and one love. To be a mystic is to be a person of one seeing, one knowledge, and one love. The Little Book of Christian Mysticism gathers together an assortment of quotations from those chosen visionary contemplatives to invite you into their unique way of seeing, knowing, and loving. There's more to the introduction, but I'm just going to randomly flip some pages and read some of the quotes. Contemplatives desire nothing in particular, but to only behold God. You, likewise, must do the same, as far as grace will allow. Choose God alone, and only God, so that neither your mind nor your will seek anything other than God. Anonymous, the Cloud of the Universe. Pure love is exercised immediately to God only in pure prayer, by which alone the Spirit is united to Him. Hence, prayer is the only efficacious instrument to obtain spiritual insight. Random page. The mystical way of life demands little trouble and care. It demands denial of the will rather than much knowledge. He who inclines to pleasure and sweetness will be less able to travel on it. John of the Cross. Would you know if you help... Let me start that one again. Would you know if you belong to his people, or rather, do you wish to be one of his disciples? Do what Jesus commands, and he will number you among his followers. Bernard of Clairvaux. So, that's the Little Book of Christian Mysticism. Now we have Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist. Introduction. There's no denying it. Communication is important. In fact, one could easily make the case that communication is central to being human. While other species on this planet can and do communicate with each other, none do so with the complexity and regularity that we do. Because of this, much has been written about the art of communication, and a trip to your local bookstore will yield a variety of books on the topic, most with a focus on one particular aspect of communication. Some are dedicated to enhancing how we interact with the workplace, or others to our romantic relationships, and still more to our relationships with our friends and family. But all these books have one thing in common. They are designed to help you learn how to communicate more effectively with others. When we talk about communication, we normally think about it in relation to everyone else. Only rarely, if ever, do we pay much attention to how we speak to ourselves. As a communication instructor, I find a lack of attention we pay to how we communicate with ourselves alarming, because what I discovered in myself, and confirmed through working with countless clients, is that there is an unreported epidemic of negative self-talk in our culture today. The truth is that many of us speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to a close friend. Some of us even speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to our worst enemy. "I'm so dumb, how could I do that again?" Or "I'm such a loser," are common phrases that people say to themselves, but rarely, if ever, do they voice those words to others. Statements like this are just the beginning of how we berate ourselves internally. In this book, I will cover many, often unnoticed ways we talk down to, berate, and chastise ourselves. We will look at the instances of our self-talk that are birthed in animosity rather than goodwill. As a simple example to begin this discussion, think for a moment about how many times you've begun a conversation in your mind or out loud with a phrase similar to one of these. "I can't do anything right today. I'm not where I should be in life. I'm so stupid. I'd be happier if I just looked more like. Maybe things would be different if I had just. I'm so bad at that. I never get this right." These are just some of the ways we start negative dialogues with ourselves, often without even realizing that we are saying is negative. We mistake many of our judgments for facts. Yet when we speak ourselves this way, we set the tone for our day and our interactions with others in the world. It is very difficult to enjoy life and experience things like peace, happiness, and goodwill on the outside when we aren't providing it to ourselves on the inside. The purpose of this book is to bring awareness to the ways we talk to ourselves, specifically the negative self-talk and the underlying self-judgments that we engage in that cloud our perceptions of ourselves and by implication the rest of the world. My hope is that by the end of this book, not only will you be more aware of your negative self-talk that most of us seem to engage in regularly, but you will also be able to spot, identify, and release it effectively. Very interesting introduction to this. This is Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist. And the last one is the Zen Book of Life. Introduction. Inspired by the Buddha and the great Zen masters, the intention of this little book is to help awaken the reader's own wisdom mind. The Zen Book of Life is filled with quotes, haiku, Zen poems, and koans, traditional riddles that masters ask a student to inspire the student's awakening. Zen is a school of Buddhism that arose in China around the 4th century CE, but was refined in Japan when a South Indian Buddhist monk named Bodhidharma allegedly brought the mind-only teaching there and started a lineage. There is one teaching that's thought to be central to Zen. One day the Buddha was to give a teaching to a huge assembly of monks and nuns gathered. The Buddha did not speak, but simply held up a flower. The crowd became restless and eager for the Buddha's teaching to begin. But his senior disciple, Kashaya, only smiled. The Buddha said Kashaya had understood the teaching and was to be known from then on as Mahakashyapa. Mahakashyapa understood the highest wisdom of the Buddha. In that moment of the Buddha holding up a flower, a direct mind-to-mind transmission had occurred, and this is seen as the beginning of the Zen lineage. Typically, Zen is a direct approach where haiku and koan are used to break conceptual thinking, leading to a glimpse of satori, or enlightenment. This direct teaching or wisdom teaching is known as Zen, Chuan in Chinese, or Zhoshen in Tibetan. Any attempt to describe Zen in words will fall short, because they are words and not experience of Zen. Or as one Zen master said, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. However, the blessing of the finger pointing to the moon is that it helps turn our focus in the right direction. May the Zen Book of Life help turn your mind to uncover your own wisdom. And here are some randomly selected quotes. Zen mind is not Zen mind. That is, if you are attached to Zen mind, then you have a problem. And your way is very narrow. Throwing away Zen mind is correct Zen mind. Only keeping the question, what is the best way of helping other people? Xuan Song. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge with it, move with it, and join the dance. Alan Watts. Dewdrops, how better wash away world's dust. As soon as you have made a thought, laugh at it. Lao Tzu. There are no ordinary moments. Dan Millman. Mindfulness is a shortcut to happiness. Buddhist monk. So that is the Zen Book of Life. So those are the 3 books I have for you today. Talk to Yourself Like a Buddhist, the Little Book of Christian Mysticism, the Zen Book of Life. We're open again Wednesday through Friday, 5 to 8. Saturday and Sunday, 11 to 5. Masks are required. And we're only letting a person in the store at a time or a group that arrives together. You're limited to 20 minutes in the store. But hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you much and have a great evening.